So we're going to be looking at Matthew 5, verses 13 through 16. We're continuing through the Gospel of Matthew, where I expect us to be most of the year. We 2 weeks ago began what is the Sermon on the Mount. This is one of Matthew's big sermons of Jesus. We've walked through the introductory chapters where we hear about Jesus' birth, Jesus' genealogy, his fulfillment of prophecy, making a strong case that he is the promised Messiah and King, and that he is God in the flesh, God with us. And so Matthew laid that foundation. Then we had Jesus called to ministry, his baptism, his time in the wilderness. We saw Jesus walking his prophetic fulfillment of Israel. Where Israel failed, Jesus is faithful. And so after establishing all of that, Jesus calls his first disciples, begins to preach, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's Matthew's summary for Jesus' preaching. He calls the disciples, preaches the same message again, and in chapter 5, we switch from that big chunk of narrative, 1 through 4, to 3 chapters of preaching. 5, 6, and 7 is the Sermon on the Mount. And we're gonna take Jesus' one sermon and hang out with it for a while. This would be likely not just a sermon that Jesus preached. Some scholars think that this is Matthew summarizing several sermons. Others say more likely it's a sermon he preached lots of places. I think that makes more sense to me because we know Jesus is traveling around, and often Matthew will say, well, he went here and he preached the gospel of the kingdom. He went here and he preached, or he went around preaching the gospel of the kingdom. He sends the disciples out to preach the gospel of the kingdom. He's got this shorthand for a message they're carrying. The reason authors think that maybe this is a compilation is in places like Luke and Mark, we see direct quotes of parts of this sermon in different places and different times mixed in with other messages. And so so maybe Matthew took all of them. As somebody who has traveled preaching, we say the same message in a lot of places. And we do mix it up a little bit, location by location. But like you saw last week, I had our mime team in. I take those guys on the road. They do the same mimes everywhere we go, which means when I talk between those mimes, I share roughly the same message. Now, when I'm sitting in a group of teenagers, I may add on a different illustration than when I'm at a nursing home. And so you're going to have some word for word the same and some extra baggage. And so when I see Jesus in the Gospels sharing roughly the same message in lots of different towns, I'm like, I get it. That's just what traveling ministry looks like. And so I think what Matthew's giving us is when they had the longest time slot, this was what they did. Other times, we get a shorter snippet, or we shared part of the message alongside a miracle, and so we tied in the miracle. Things like that. But I think this very likely represents a normal, if not one of the first messages Jesus would have preached. And as I think it pictures well the basic gospel of the kingdom. So 2 weeks ago, we looked at the first 12 verses, which were called the Beatitudes, the blesseds. Blessed is this, blessed is this, blessed is this. And we talked about how that shows the values of Christ's kingdom and the kind of people he wants to disciple us into. Now we move into his first word picture in 13 through 16. So let me read it. You can follow along with me. Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16, reading from the ESV, says this. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. I think my next 2 slides were review ones that I was supposed to have already had up there. So we'll see if I can take us through them. Yeah, so blessed last week we talked about the values. The kingdom of heaven is revealed in the followers of Jesus whose lives are already shaped by the world to come. And we walked through the 7 different values pictured there. We also noted that when we look at the way Jesus is making disciples, there's little observations on Jesus' model of discipleship that we'll make throughout this series. And the third one, we notice that discipleship isn't only concerned with actions, but with thinking, values, and character. He didn't just give them an apprenticeship on a trade, but he used travel with me, preach with me, do miracles with me as a way to go, who do you say that I am? To get into the heart and values. What does it mean to be meek and humble? What does it mean to hunger and thirst for righteousness? He's shaping their hearts, not just their actions. And so our discipleship should be the same. Now, getting us into this week, there's my little spinny man. Make him stop so he can go to the next slide. Let it go. There it goes. I've titled the sermon this week, The End of Good Works, as a deliberate play on words. As we look at this Jesus discipling for character and the way he's going to engage the law all through the Sermon on the Mount, but these first 13, 16 verses, he's gone to the heart. He's not looking for a performance Christianity. So on one end, I would say he's putting an end to the idea of a good works Christianity. That if you want to be a follower of Jesus, here's the list, do the thing, you're good enough. What we don't see here is a picture of a faith that is merited or attained by works. We see humble people who come before him and say, I have nothing, and then God has to fill them. God has to let them inherit the earth. God has to comfort them. All through the Beatitudes and even into here, it's got this passive tense where God's doing and we're surrendering to him. And so what I want you to catch from today's verses and these pictures of being salt and light is whatever good works the Christian does do, and I think we'll do stuff. So I want to put an end of self-righteous good gifts. But I also want to say the end goal of our good works. What's the end of a good work? If we do good stuff, why? The end of it is the glory of God. Whatever good works a Christian does do, they flow out from our identity in Christ with the purpose of glorifying God. The end goal of good works is the worship of God. So that's what I mean by the end of good works. We're going to follow Jesus, and there's going to be stuff we do that comes out of it. The reason we do that is to worship him and to draw others into the worship of God. So with that said, the big idea that I see in this passage is going to be this. The Christian life is a surrender to the active will of God in us, transforming us into encounters with God to a watching world. So I'm surrendering to God, and God's working in me, which makes me an encounter with God for people around me. They don't go, wow, I saw Tim today. They meet me and they go, I saw God. Tim was the context, but that wasn't Tim. They see God working through us. So the stuff we do is an overflow of God working in us, so much so. The end of our passage says, let your light shine before others, that when they see your good deeds, they glorify your Father in heaven. They don't glorify us. Our goal is not that people see our good deeds and think Christ House is an awesome church. I hope they don't notice Christ House. I hope they just see God and glorify him. God working through us. So that's the big picture. Where do I get this idea? Obviously, from the end of the verse, it clearly states it. But also this idea that it's not just do stuff. I'm going to keep rolling past that one too because I said it earlier. But the overall context of where we've been in verses 1 through 16, I noted 2 weeks ago what we called, some commentators called the divine passive. It says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, right? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. And over, it doesn't say they will, figure out how to get stuff. They will obtain it for themselves. They will feed themselves. It says they're in the passive tense as the recipients of an inheritance, the recipients of a filling or a comforting and they call it the divine passive, because over you have to ask, well, who's filling them? Who's giving them, inheriting the kingdom? And then as it goes through those 7 blesseds, you start to have, because they shall see God. They shall be called the sons of God. They are being claimed by God. When they come in this surrender before him, he's the one filling. He's the one blessing. He's the one working through them, such that people see God in them. And so then we come to our passage, and the passive continues. It doesn't say, you should be salt of the earth. Try hard to be salty. You should be the light of the world. Get your matches ready. It again puts it in this passive place. You are. If you're a follower of Jesus, this is who you are. This is what he's done to you and does through you. It's not something you make happen. It's something you be. And so the overall context, we have this passive voice in the Beatitudes in our identity. It's not a striving, but something God does to us. Our role is a surrender to him. His role is to work through surrendered people. That's why they can give him the credit. If my role is to take my cues from this, but then I go do it, then they see me. I'm the light. I'm the salt. Glorify me. But if I come to this in this passive role saying, Lord, I surrender to you. You work on me. You flow through me. Then when they see it, they're going to say, Tim got out of the way. That's why he was a light today. And so we get two pictures of what it looks like when we surrender to God and live in the identity of a disciple. We get the end goal of this discipleship, the good deeds, the good works, is this picture of God in us. So that picture takes two forms in our passage, salt and light. And I want to look at both those pictures in the way that our passage unfolds them. There is obviously endless ways to make analogies and illustrations from salt and light. They're great illustration options, but Jesus uses them in particular ways. So the first one is salt. With salt in their day and their culture, what I'm going to argue is that salt is about preserving. I know we normally think of salt as a flavor thing, but you got to remember, in their day, refrigerators were not a thing yet. So all meat has to be preserved, generally done with salt, which is to say, you don't think about flavoring meat with salt. All the meat is salty. It's all more salty than you probably would like for flavor purposes. But it being salty is good news, because salted meat isn't rotten meat. You know, like for us, we're like, how much salt do you like? Because all your meat's safe. They're not thinking, do I like the flavor? They're like, is this going to kill me? This is not very salty. That's a bad day. How old is this meat? So we don't see them using salt so much as a spice in this era, because they were using it for preservation. It was everywhere. And so the idea here is there's a need. We have an item that's decaying and rotting, and we have something that can prevent that can slow that down. And so when he says if the salt is no longer salty, he's not talking about salt losing its flavor, because that's actually not really a thing as far as we know. It doesn't happen. We're talking about salt using its function. If you dilute it with enough other dirt and ashes and gravel and stuff, it doesn't preserve well. And so if you have bad salt in that sense, diluted and defiled salt, which some guys would argue is a fair translation for lose its saltiness, you have salt that serves no purpose. In fact, it's risky salt now, because you're going to use it on the meat, and the meat's going to go bad. So this idea here is that Christians as salt constrain and reduce the evil in the world. Right? We've talked about from Adam, sin has reigned, and death through sin has reigned. We see a world that is falling apart because of sin. And he says, but you're here because you're salt. Your role is constraining that. It's restricting it. This would be what we call, in a theological way, common grace. That God has left you here so the world isn't as bad as it could be. That your presence and your love of God is making the world better than it would be otherwise, because you as salt keep the spread of evil in check. The lost world isn't as bad as it could be. We're part of God's common grace to the world. When we care about what God cares about and act in the world in a manner that seeks to see those values happen, we're salt. When people experience the heart of God through the actions of Christians, they taste the savor of God preserving his world through his people. They get little glimpses of what the world ought to be if it wasn't rotting. And so people should be able to get a tangible savor of life in us. The human flourishing that was lost when man sinned in Eden is still tasted in God's church. When they find our homes be places of peace. Oh yeah, I have a slide for that. Thank you. When they find our homes be places of peace and security, they taste God's glory. When they find our management in the workplace to be just and compassionate, they taste God's glory. When they find our care for them as neighbors or community members treats them with the value and dignity of image bearers, they taste the glory of God. Every moment we live as citizens of the kingdom of heaven and mirror the heart of our King, Jesus' message of repent, for the kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven is at hand, echoes out into the world like salt preserving a chunk of meat that has been left out in the sun. We're little spots of preserved goodness in the brokenness all around. So this is the idea here. People should be getting a taste of what we ought to be, what we were meant to be and have lost, because Christians are being that now. And they see in that God. They see God's good plan, God's good order, and they see the world not going as broken as it would have otherwise were it not for God putting Christians in the world in this preserving role. And so one of the reasons what this hits us is it puts on us a sense of obligation. If the salt's lost its saltiness, what's the point? That's what Jesus says. One of the reasons that I want to let go of my sin and surrender to the life of Jesus is because I want the world to experience the better way. People are looking to you for an example that there is something better than the rotting flesh of life apart from Christ. And so when I block out God's Spirit from changing my character into the likeness of the blessedness that we read about in verses 1 through 12, when I choose not to be that kind of preserving presence in the world, I leave the world out to rot. They don't get to see that role. They don't experience that common grace that could point them to the fuller grace of life in Jesus. I've shared this with some of you guys, some of you even recently. One of the areas that has motivated me to deal with sin in my own life is having younger people that I'm mentoring coming to me and wrestling with the same things. And I start going, man, I want to see them be free. And so if I don't get serious and deal with my own stuff, how am I going to help them? See, because outside of that, I'm like, well, if it's not messing with my life, what do I care? And it's kind of have all these self-centered motives that I'm wrestling through. But I'm a dad now, and I have a daughter. And I want to model for her a love of Jesus and a following of Jesus. Love for my daughter, love for people I'm investing in motivates me to be more consistent in my walk with Christ. Because I don't want to trip them. I want to be a preserving role in their life that points them to God. And so he says, you understand, you've been left here for a purpose. The salt is to preserve. If it's not preserving, what's the point? He says it's good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled under feet. When you see the end of good works as glorifying God in the eyes of the lost, you see allowing God to deal with your own sin as an act of love instead of self-promotion. It's about being the love of God as a preserving presence until he returns. And so the idea of being thrown out is it's just lost its point. You were left here, and God desires to see you grow in holiness because the world needs you doing that so that they can experience God and seek him for themselves. Those areas you've been neglecting, overlooking, you know that there's sin that's been ignored, kept secret, hidden, just areas where you're not salt. And the world is rotting flesh and needs that salt. So that's this picture of salt. People are looking to you for an example. Are you going to point them to the way of Jesus? So salt of the earth, a preserving force that shows the glory of God. Second analogy. He calls them the light of the world, right? You are the light of the world, a city on a hill, a light that's on a lampstand, not stuck under a bowl. Just making sure I didn't skip anything. So what's with this light analogy? He's saying you guys are going to be shining out into the world. Light makes its presence known. Again, just like the salt, he didn't say try to be salty. This is when you surrender to God, he transforms you and you have this role. People see the better way in you. Likewise, light is just a thing that fills an empty space. Like darkness isn't a thing, light is. Darkness is when there's no light. And so if I'm coming into Jesus, there's a sense in which the identity of God in me just fills stuff. It just flows out. Both of these are pictures of something that is experiential. People don't just hear the message, they encounter something that they experience, they taste, they see. So you don't wonder if there's light. You don't go, is there light in this room? I'm not sure. You just, if the lights are on, you can't ignore it. Light has a transforming presence simply by being. That part of our role as Christians is a ministry of presence. We just go places and live as Christians, and that changes the room. And so while I think words matter, Jesus is preaching his sermon, so clearly words are part of what we do. He's calling them to live in a way that speaks and preaches. Because sometimes it's not just the thing that's said that's going to matter. People just need someone to be with them. Emily has experienced that these last couple weeks. I don't have anything new to say to her about being sick and being stuck at home. But we've hung out a lot. A ministry of presence that changes the atmosphere and the attitude and the perspective. I don't tell her, hey, feel better. I just show up and have a bright attitude and encourage her. This is a light role that we're supposed to have, where we carry the presence and the reality of the eternal kingdom into the broken, sad place that we live. But the other role of light, and I think this is more central to Jesus' own analogy, is it makes it so others can see. He gives this picture of not ignoring it and not cloistering it, right? Don't put it under a bowl. Don't keep, because you could be a light in a bowl. You can do that. But he's like, no, the point was the light shines out so others can see it. The point, we don't build a city in a cave or in a valley. It's up on a hill. I want this to be something that the surrounding area can see because it's there. Psalms 36:9 says it this way. For with you is a fountain of life. In your light do we see light. C.S. Lewis, on the same vein, in his book, The Weight of Glory, which I'm slowly listening to on audiobook, said, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen. Not only because I see it, because by it I see everything else. He's just taken the idea of the Psalms. In your light, we see light. There are things you need to experience to understand. And when Christians come as a light to the world, we are showing the world as it actually is. When the lights are off, you can think a lot of weird things. When I was growing up, I'm the middle of 7 kids, so we always shared rooms. And we had this bunk bed that I think all of us had at different times. And the spindles on it had these weird like shapes to them. And when I would lay on the bottom bunk at night and the lights were all off and cars would drive by, the headlights coming through the windows would catch those spokes or and make these weird shadows move across the room. And little 5-year-old Tim was just sure there was invisible monsters in the room, and you could just see them by their shadows, because when it's all dark and I'm just making the best of it, I could imagine what they looked like. I had pretty convincing, they had trunks and stuff. But you turn the light on, there's no monsters in there. Like, it's pretty clear. It's just the same boring old room it's always been. When we live in darkness, we can distort, we can twist, but it's all off. What ought to be is, if we're light, is that we're the ones speaking truth and reality. There ought to be a reasonableness and meaning-giving substance to our involvement in the world. We bring the sanity. So we're not supposed to be the superstitious ones in the group. We're the reality, saying this is what the world actually is. The lost are the ones who are chasing shadows and make-believes. I think if some of you guys were there years ago, we had our diner theology gatherings over the Neptune Diner, and we had a series. We met to talk about faith and reason. And you remember we had a young lady who's an atheist, heard about it and said she wanted to come to represent reason in the meeting. And we said, great, come. And then we had a wonderful night. We treated her with respect, gave her a lot of time to share her side. But ultimately, we challenged her that she wasn't reasonable. We let her define reason. And I asked her how, on her definitions of reason, she could have any sense of morality. Because her morality had no empirical basis. She couldn't measure it, taste it, touch it, weigh it. So I said, you don't have a reasonable morality. You just made one up. That's superstition and make-believe, what you're telling us we do. You don't like our Bible, but it does provide us an objective source. If I say murder is okay, you can say, no, Tim, actually it's not. And you can check this. I mean, you can all read it separately, and it won't read differently. It's the same text in everybody's hands. And so because we have an objective source of truth, we have an objective foundation for morality, which means Christianity has a reasonable morality. When we speak to the world, we say, yeah, that's not right, and that is right. And we don't have to fudge on that. And if someone says, oh, no, you were wrong, it was because we were wrong and misread. Just like you could do a bad science experiment, and if you misread the thermometer, the science, the rock wasn't a lie, you just were mistaken, and we can retest it, relook it, and we can correct it because there's an objective source. When we come to the world, Christians are this voice of sanity saying, yes, not everything's okay. Not anything goes. You can't call anything whatever you want it. There's right and there's wrong. And we speak and call out evil in the world. It's part of our preserving salt role. The reason, and so the people want to come at the Christians and say, well, how do Christians explain, since you're going to say there's right and wrong, how do you explain the problem of evil, right? This is a big apologetics and philosophy discussion. If there's evil and a good God, did God make evil, or where did evil come from? That's like one of the big... But the point is, the only reason Christians have the problem of explaining evil is because we have the privilege of being able to define evil. The lost don't have to explain evil because they can't even defend that there is evil. They have to somehow look at all the brokenness in the world, all the terrible things that happen, and say, they're not objectively wrong. We just decided in democratic fashion that we all don't like it. So it's not evil, it's just unpopular. They don't have a problem with evil because they don't have evil. We have a much better footing. We have a hard time understanding the bigger things of the God of the universe, but we have a clear sense of what's right and wrong in his world. And the reason Christianity has a problem of explaining evil in the world is precisely because Christianity lays bare the reality of evil in the world like a light does. It objectively defines it and points it out. It's because we're able to clearly and powerfully condemn and confront evil as such that we must then wrestle with explaining where it came from. But the world apart from God, apart from God's light, has no such rationality. It cannot objectively define evil, nor therefore forcefully confront it, and it so is excused from having to explain it. Instead, the world without light has the much more pitiable task of trying to manage evils, because they can't be ignored regardless of your definitions, but they must do so in the darkness, apart from moral light. We should be the ones coming in, and the lights go on, and suddenly you see all the stuff going on that shouldn't have been happening. It was hideable. It was redefinable. We can say it's monsters. We can say it's until the switch goes on, and it's like, no, this is what it is. Our presence should be that kind of a sanity in the world that makes evil known and makes good known. You can see the whole picture. You see what things actually are. We're to be the light that shows the way, to borrow from the pop culture. This is the way, right? The Christian seeks to be a disciple because when our life is being conformed to the character of Jesus, we show the way. Jesus is the way. And when we're like him, we say to the world, this is the way. And so it's not enough for them just to tell them the way. They need to see the way. They need the light in which to see the way. And so you can preach love all day long. But if a person has only known abuse that was perversely called love, they will not hear your intended meaning. We've run into this. We say God is love, and then everybody means something profoundly different when they say that. Because without the light defining good as good, they don't even know what you're saying. I had this experience with a friend. We were talking, as young single guys do, about disciplining our future kids as if, we had it all figured out. And the theories of would you do this or that. And I remember we somehow got on the topic of, would you ever consider spanking? And we just veered in like completely opposite directions. It was like, one was like, I'm open to different things, but I was spanked and it wasn't a big deal, and it mostly made sense. And the other guy was like, never, like full stop, never, ever, I would never do that. And we like kept talking and looking at verses and trying to like what's biblical, what's not. And at some point we had to stop and go, what did your parents do to you? Well, then I discovered that when we talked about spanking, what we were both thinking of were not even in the same boxes. One of us was talking like a gentle swat after like a prayerful conversation and a hug, and usually some fun hang time with your parents afterwards. The other was talking about switches and double-digit numbers of swats on a bare butt to the point where bruises and cuts were left. And I was like, oh, hold on. Words were not making this clear because experiences had already defined the words. And I'm not saying that to get into a discussion of what you should. Obviously, I said we were singles and clueless, so I use as an example. It wasn't enough to just have a conversation because our experiences were defining the words. When Jesus says, I need you to be salt and light, he's saying, the world's in darkness. They're blind. They're lost. And evil is already rotting this thing out. So I need you guys to be in there preserving and illuminating, because that's how they're going to actually understand the glory of God. They won't even see God as glorious if they don't taste his glory and see his glory through you. They'll see him as something other, something bad. He's the monster because of the headlights. So go be light. Go be salt. So when they see your good works, they go, oh, that's what you meant. The end of good works is that through them people finally see God in his glory. That's what verse 16 says. They see the good and they feel the weight of that glory because of his light. They finally see light. That's what we want to see flowing from our lives. If we do any transformation, accountability partners, change our character, it's because we want people to see through us the glory of God, to see that his good is truly good. And so this picture here in the passage is that salt and light are experiential encounters with God. The end of good works is the glory of God revealed. The focus here is on the effects of those things going out into the world. That's what verses 14 and 15 are focusing on. When we are salt and light, it's not contained. It's not restricted to the Christian community, gatherings, or activities. It's not some city hidden in a cave or a lamp in a bowl. When we become disciples of Jesus and embrace the character that this discipleship desires to form in us, there is a global impact that radiates outward. And so this being salt and light is not a matter of just sermons and words, but lives lived. This is why over and over I tell you when we come that you are our altar call. I ask you every week if you share Jesus out there. Because I don't think the lost are supposed to come crawling into some basement church to find the light. This would be the bowl. You have to be salt and light out there. You have to share the gospel out there through your behavior, through your character, and yes, through your words. Out there. Otherwise, if it's just come to the Christian things, Christian events and the Christian buildings, then we are not salt and light. We have totally embraced a city in a cave and a light under a bowl. If you've been discipled by Jesus, your identity is changed such that you cannot blend in. If Jesus isn't coming up in your daily life, maybe you need to be discipled more by Jesus to become more like him in daily life. Because being salt and light is a natural consequence of who you are in Christ. It's just what he does if he's there. And so if you're not salt and light, the answer isn't to try and be salty and lighty, but to surrender more of your life to Jesus, who is the salt and light, so that he flows through you. Because the object of these experiences we hope that people around us are having through us is that they glorify God. And so God's got to be there in glory if they're going to glorify him. What is the end of good works? Is it enough just to preserve or to guide if we do not do so in a way that people see God? This isn't about being good people in the world. It's about being signposts that point to the heavenly kingdom that is even now at hand, at the very door, breaking in. It's the imminence of the reign of Jesus revealed to those who have not yet bent the knee. We must always point to God, always magnify God, always be drawing people to enter into a worshiping relationship with the Almighty. When we're that kind of salt and light, then the message is, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And so the Christian life is a surrender to the active will of God in us, transforming us into encounters with God to a watching world. I hope that in the sense, you see where this shifts it from a just do good works to earn something, and instead to a good works flowing from our identity with the purpose of glorifying God so the world will worship him. So I want to give us some questions to chew on. We'll break out into groups. And this is the call to be salt and light. Then the two questions I would give you, there they are. How could Christ-like character have a preserving or guiding impact in the places you spend time this week? How could you be salt and light? If you were actually more like Jesus, how would it be salty and lighty wherever you're going to be this week? And lighty's not a word, but deal with me. Question 2. What are ways our group or our church could be salt and light to our community together? How do we make sure that our church isn't just an in-here thing, that we're actually getting out there and being salt and light, not just as individuals? Question 1 is for you as an individual, but together. They should see this community. It should be on a hill. It should be making a preserving impact in our community. They should taste and see God because our church is here. So how do we do that together? So those are your two questions. You can hit others as you see fit, but I'm going to let you break into groups.